Have permission. And this is Dave Rossi from Generation Z. You guys should both know each other because you both hail from Canada, and I love bringing new people together. So I'm just going to turn it over to you guys, and you guys can chat about whatever you want. Have fun.
Wow, what do you mean you're gonna leave it to us? You got to get involved in this too.
Well, I'll be around, but you guys are just going to get to it. So
Okay.
welcome, Dave.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Dave. Maybe we, as Canadians, you can explain the name of your podcast, and it has a hidden meaning that maybe Americans won't pick up.
Sure, sounds good. So my name is Dave Zed. 24 years old. I'm a creator and host of the Generation Z podcast, spelled ZED. And essentially, what we cover is everything from attempting to take as neutral as a stance as possible on covering global affairs that tends to transition into politics. We cover things, actually much more avidly, things pertaining to the UAP field. You could call, fringe, high strangeness, the paranormal, you name it. But we definitely do a vast, we could say, exploration and detailed deep dive of all of those topics and how that could pertain or even could not pertain to esotericism, metaphysics, and of course the nuts and bolts of electrical engineering, particle physics, algebra, you name it. So we try and take all the pieces and slices of the metaphorical pie or pizza, really, and bring it all together into a manner that's integratable in a way that can at least attempt to use process of elimination to essentially, as Dr. Pudov said at the 2021 SCU conference, keep all possibilities on the table till there's enough data to take them off the table. So I'm very happy to be here. It's an honor, and I can't thank you enough to the both of you.
Beautiful. And Nicole, you should pick up on it. It's Z, not Z. Z. We're just that's what it's about. We Canadians, we're trying to straighten you guys out on how to talk. And it's not roof like a dog, it's roof. I need a roof. And then you go, what, you need a new dog? Or like, what's going on here? Like, give me one, let me give you one more. We got to straighten out this Canadian American stuff. When you make macaroni and cheese, it's called mac and cheese. But when it comes out of a box, it's called Kraft dinner. That's what it's called in Canada. Kraft dinner, KD. I'm having KD tonight, not mac and cheese. So we just some of the things. There's a couple. It's eaves troughs, not rain gutters, because we got to straighten that one out. You're mispronouncing that one. And the other one is you have when you have you call it a parking garage. It's called a parkade. So just we got to straighten you Canadians out. And it's like we say A, and in Mexico on the other side of you they say C. So you're supposed to say B. So it's Canada goes A and then B and then C. Okay. Now that said, let me. You got a question for Dave? You came back. Maybe you got a question.
I was just going to throw out the good intro question of what drug you into this field, because nobody comes into it lightly. So let's start with that. Like,
sure. So essentially, what got me interested in this was about two and a half years ago. Well, to be fair, I've always had an underlying interest since I was probably 5 or 6 years old in the paranormal, high strangeness. Wasn't sure what to make of it. I did not correlate that to or even liken that to the UAP phenomenon, but would watch it in the 2010, 2011 years. Ancient Aliens, all that kind of stuff. Would come home from school and watch all of that. But essentially, what happened was, to be very blunt with you, what happened was that when the pandemic first started and March time of 2020, when the whole world, generally speaking, had 2 to 3 months of everyone staying home, no one really knew what was going on. Actually, it wasn't this topic initially that got me into it. As a matter of fact, what I tried to do, as I tell everybody, is a very unoriginal idea. I tried to just very simply emulate Joe Rogan in the sense of just covering all topics, just talking to people, covering all topics. But because I didn't have social media, I had no way of, plan to self-promote and all of this kind of stuff. I would maybe get 10 views or listens per episode. And if, 7 of those 10 being my mother, I would be happy. So I would got like nobody watching me. And so then I did an episode on project, I believe it was Blue Beam. And it was just me talking into a microphone, black screen. And what ended up happening was I had maybe 50, 60 subscribers on my YouTube channel at the time. And that video got about 4,500, 5,000 views or listens. And I said, okay, maybe there's something here. Then the one after that, I did an episode on, I believe it was I think it was Operation Paperclip, if I'm not mistaken. And then I had then that one got about 1,500 views or listens. And I said, okay, there's something here relative to my, age-old interest since I was younger into this. And then what I started doing after that was I started delving into the both high strangeness, paranormal, and UFO UAP community. And I found, at the time at least, now things have changed to be fair, I found one thing that I personally noticed was not necessarily, at least noticeably, present in the field, which was that there were so many different channels and places, networks, discords to discuss all these things. But one thing, and this is not a jab at anybody at all, one thing I found was that, at least at the time, to my knowledge, there did not seem to be one, we could say, hub of any type of whether it's a podcast or a Reddit forum or something, where someone didn't say, this is my way, take it or leave it. There was no place to just come and have an open set of discussions in a loose collated manner, I should say, because I found a lot of people pushing it's either my way or the highway, very close-minded. It's like, why can't we pluck a little bit from here, a little bit from there, and do our best to work together in a good faith manner, and not let emotion get involved in negatively, and not let the whole, okay, I'm an engineer, you're a physicist, stay in your lane type thing. I'm a philosopher, you're a this, stay in your lane. And that's what I tried to do, and slowly but surely, just built it, starting with one episode every other day for the show, to one a day, to now we have 7 or 8 different exclusive segments depending on what the viewer wants to delve into. So long story short, that's basically how and why I got started.
Have you ever had a sighting? Have you ever had any paranormal activity in your life?
Constant.
Constant? Is that right?
Oh yeah, constantly. When I was back in Toronto, currently in Manitoba, for those watching or listening, back in Toronto, anywhere from 1 to 3 craft visiting me outside of my apartment, probably every night, almost, to the point where I could see the craft. It looked more like what people would describe as a plasma type shape around it. It was traditional disc with a sort of a seemingly plasma sphere, energetic sphere surrounding it, encompassing it. Not claiming that's what it was. Again, if I'm not right at the craft myself, I'm not going to claim what it was or wasn't. But to my eyes, that's what it appeared to be. And the craft the craft have become, at this point, almost like the back of my hand in terms of the sightings in that regard, whether it's cigar craft or you name it. I had I don't know still what to make of this. I had a very interesting interaction with I don't know what, at a bookstore in the spiritual section. And I looked at this individual. They were probably, give or take, 6.5 feet in height, very analogous to that of the alleged Palladian description of how they, blonde hair, lean, muscular frame from head to toe. And this individual was, I'm about 5'10". This individual was significantly taller than me, obviously, and was reading a book. I'm not sure what book. And you could say my instinct, my gut, what you name it, told me to sort of take a glimpse at this individual, not in a judgmental way, but it was kind of like, something seems a little bit peculiar, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And then this individual looks at me, and then I look back at him, and then he looked back at me again. But this time when he did, his entire eyeball from the center filled black, like from the pupil, and then it like spread out all the way to the edge. The feeling I got was, again, forgive me for likening this to that of you could say a dog or an animal, but a very intuitive feeling, kind of like a leave me alone type feeling, if that makes sense. But that's the farthest to the extent in which I've had you could say interactable contact with something I couldn't explain. Sightings, if I'm being very honest, I don't mean to be vague here, but constant. So
what was this person wearing?
Light blue button shirt, white tight pants, sort of like European style. I think black, brown shoes. The button shirt was a t-shirt. The closest I can give to a description would be, I don't even know why or how I remember this guy's name, but the Italian model Fabio Lanzoni, I think. That's the
Recall
yeah.
it.
I'm gonna have to Google that. I
That's
only know one Fabio, and he's on the corner of romance or the cover of romance novels. All
I
the
that
90s.
them
So.
it might be him. It might be him.
Blonde hair, that
Yes,
guy. Like,
yes.
okay, yeah, yeah. So,
Blue eyes.
yep.
Yes, that's him. And that's exactly the same. Well, not the exact same, but the closest I can liken it to in a realistic manner to that of you could say what I experienced.
That was here in Winnipeg?
That was in Toronto.
Okay. Wow. And so would you consider yourself a lifer? We usually defy this thing where, you may have come in. Do you think you have a mission? Do you feel sort of drawn to do something about this, or?
Truth be told, initially, no. In the last, I'd say 3 to 6 months, yeah. To be completely honest with you, and you could say a mission, an objective, and what that would be to just not particularly raise awareness for everyone, but raise awareness for those willing to be open to it, to the phenomenon, if that makes sense. I think sort of like the Hermetic principles, as above, so below. If you have people being aware of it, by definition, there have to be people that will not be. And it's not, I don't mean to seem selfish or anything like in this regard, but I think that I don't, for lack of a better term, I don't think there's much, and I don't mean to seem fear mongering. I don't think there's much time to sort of try and, I guess you could say, raise this, jam this in everybody's face globally. I think that those that are willing to even notice a slight alteration in their everyday lives and look into it, I think that is exactly who we could say, quote unquote, meant to convey this to. And just kind of, as Bruce Lee says, be like water, right? Flow like the river. You put a rock in the water flows around the rock type thing. So I liken that to the way that I go pursue this mission in this regard.
Any synchronicities along the way that sort of gave you indication that you may be on the right track?
Every day, sir. I mean, whether it's colors, numbers, messages, certain occurrences within my life, the more I, you could say, delve into this particular topic, from an attempt to merge, different aspects of particle physics, electrical engineering, algebra, philosophy, ontology, you name it, with that of, again, just trying current reported cases, cross-referencing data, all that kind of stuff, constant. Yeah.
Nicole, you got a question?
Well, I just keep what's jumping in my mind right now is I've heard this, with several people, whether it's a calling or a mission, that sort of thing. And I've heard this, like you described, the rock in the water, it's also kind of the waves of awakening. Not everybody is going to get hit with that message at the same time. So I do kind of understand what you're saying.
I think to your point, Nicole, I think to that, I think as well, one thing that people quite often, talk about is, well, they feel anxious or they feel depressed. Well, there's that whole, postulation that anxiety is worrying about something that hasn't happened, and depression is something that's already happened, that one is, regurgitating in a cyclical form in their head over and over. And one thing that I find is that it's if we were to build upon that Bruce Lee example of, water goes into a cup, it becomes the cup, it goes into a bucket, it becomes the bucket. For me, say, for example, in this metaphor, the rock is a problem. Well, we'll deal with the rock when it comes, if it comes. If not, don't think about it, don't worry about it. And to me as well, that speaks to the joy is in the journey. I bring this up on my show quite often, that as well as we have, physicists, computer scientists hypothesizing that between, frequency strings, between transition nodes or transition states, sometimes the frequency leaving one node and heading to another, the transition state between one node to another is more significant than the node it's landing to. And to me, that speaks to the joys in the journey. That speaks to the caduceus within many different cultures of our, human history, where the caduceus is, you could say, life per se, in the sense of vibration and constant movement and all of this. So that's usually where I go. I think there's a way to multiple ways to merge the metaphysical with the scientific, with the philosophical, you name it. So
Okay, so then that does bring me to my question then, since you seem to have a solid grasp of the path that you're on, in this community or what you're digging through. So if you want to get more specific, what Grant and I like to call them rabbit holes, but what rabbit holes do you dive into? Like what's really like pushing you in this community?
Well, I'll tell you right now, one thing that I will be very clear in saying the last 3 to 4 months have really been, you could say, revelatory for me in the sense of a lot of the things that I've come across, because it's gone from a good friend of ours, Nicole, actually described it to me perfectly. He said, Dave, he goes, it started first with words. The words went to images. The images then went to numbers, with respects to being able to sort of, you could say, decipher some of the things I've been pursuing, and I'll dive into in a second what I've been delving into. But the reason I preface that with this is because for me, pertaining to this objective or overall initiative with raising awareness in the UAP field, my objective is much more, you could say, much more focused than that. But at the same time, I also think that for me personally, and I don't mean to sound conceited, but I would rather say respectfully confident in the sense that I know what I have to do in terms of a multi-pronged multi-pronged areas of different, you could say, subtasks within this field. People want to make fun of me, they can go for it all day long. They want to, hop along, by all means. So some of the things I've been looking into lately is, and forgive me for the word lingo, I'm really not trying to go Mr. Smartass here, but bidirectional, you could say, longitudinal waves based off of Maxwell's quaternions, things like scalar potentials, partial derivatives, and the equations then translate back into geometry, and then the geometry then provides me an interpretation from a philosophical sense, sort of truthfully jumping all over the place, with respects to both, you could say, I read a lot of academic papers, for example, one by Gina Mondini and Ezio Gagliardi, I think, which is DNA modification via remote intent, the alteration via intent in that regard, which speaks to more of a, you could say, organically spiritual foundation, as well as, right now I'm reading a paper out of the Institute of Electron Physics in Ukraine, I think, which is SGME, slightly generalized Maxwell equations. So I jump all over, to be honest with you. In terms of what am I pursuing right now at this very moment, those were two of the things. I got like another 7 probably, but that just to give you an idea, that would be what I'm delving into. I mean, finding in a geometrical sense that some of the visualizations from the equations, when drawn out and looked at from a macroscopic perspective, tend to form the visual of the toroid field, the infinity symbol, even the owl of Minerva, more specifically, from an ontological point of view. So constantly, the Mesopotamia, ancient Sumer, the squaring of the circle, as it's been called, all of that, I've been correlating that with the Einstein's Levi-Cavita space-time metric, and how, again, a reinterpretation, and this is not to say I'm correct whatsoever, but a reinterpretation of a lot of the older, more traditional, fundamental, you could say, bases, if you will, just all across the board, really. If there's an idea or something that I find my gut tells me to run with, I stick with my gut. I listen to my intuition. I run with it. Very simple for me. If my intuition tells me back off, lean away, that's what I do. I'll have some days where I want to delve into, the mathematics of things, and I'll wake up, have my cup of coffee, and then my intuition will tell me, no, delve more into the psychological aspect or anthropological aspect of things. And I'll end up reading, a part of a book or a paper on something pertaining to that, and how that could then be, I then ask myself, okay, I've learned this, but as they say, the joy's in the journey. So what's next in this journey? So I then go, okay, how can this potentially be applied to a multifaceted, you could say, I call them operations or engines, if you will, but again, modalities, you name it. So that's sorry for the long-winded answer, but
No problem. No, do you have a science background? Is that why you're delving
no,
into this
sir.
now?
No,
No?
sir. I failed grade 9 math, and this is what perplexes me as well. This is why I say in the last 3 to 4 months, I don't know what's been occurring, but I couldn't, what I'm doing right now, I could not do 3, 4 months ago. I don't know. And I genuinely mean that.
Let me interject though, just to clarify. You receive Right. Like part of your high strangeness is you might get what like
I
call a
I
download,
I
and
don't
you would chase down a download through these various avenues that you just described that pique your
I
interest.
call it yeah, I call it leaning into myself, if that makes sense. The more I doubt myself, the more that leaning into myself tends to disappear, which just makes me think, for example, it's for me it's as simple as if my intuition tells me, here's my cell phone, it's on the table, move it 2 inches over, I'll do it just because my intuition tells me. But yes, essentially I receive I've only recently started speaking publicly about this. It's been, as I said, last 4 months, very particularly has been occurring. I get a like a jolt on the right side of my brain, and then a shiver shoots down my spine, and then from there, it I'm not trying to exaggerate. Just
Can
all of a
these
sudden, there's
do
this
these
information in
jolts,
my head. Sorry.
sorry to interrupt, but do these jolts happen spontaneously, or do you kind of set the tone for these things to happen like through meditation
Con-
or
Constantly, particularly the last 2 months, every single day, whether awake or asleep. As a matter of fact, I tell people on my Patreon, we do 2 to 3 times per week group Zoom calls to sort of just exchange ideas and sort of create a family, if you want to call it. I tell them that I've unfortunately, it's probably not the best choice, but I've resorted to smoking some weed and one cigarette in the evening because it knocks me out and prevents me from receiving them overnight, simply because I just want to sleep and knock out because it's been that excessive. So I again, um,
no,
take that with
that's
a grain of salt as you will. As I always say, that's
I think that's a back and forth with individuals. I think if they want to turn it on, they do. If they want to get rid of dreams or whatever, they're trying to
sure.
block out, then they self-medicate in ways that they can. So,
It's
Don't
not.
don't
It's
do don't do that in the United States, Nicole. It's illegal down there. It's legal here. It's legal here.
it's
Everybody in America should know it's legal here.
it's legal in Illinois as well.
It's legal. Okay, so then you can do it. Okay, then you can do it.
We're all good.
but actually, I do want to say as well, I want to thank you for even asking that, Nicole, because this recording, whenever or however it'll be released, is actually the first time I'll be discussing this publicly. So I'm happy to be discussing it here for the first time, if anywhere else. So
So let me ask you, because I wrote a book called Inspired, The Paranormal World of Creativity, where I look into all sorts of inventions and Nobel Prizes and musical people and how
mhm.
creativity takes place. So what would you guess? And I guess you can only guess at what is the creative process.
The creative, for me, it's very simple. Um, okay, this actually speaks to me,
Yeah,
to when people say, well, you got to raise your vibration or we have to increase consciousness. Well,
yeah,
okay, I'm all for that, but what does that mean? And so
yeah.
to your point, Grant, I think that what that means is I would like to liken that to your question, if I may, which is spending time alone, asking yourself, what do you like? What do you not like? And when people say, well, how do I know what I like or not like? Pick something, just pick it and do it. That you won't know until you try it, first and foremost. I don't mean to sound like every other motivational speaker out there, but even when Nikola Tesla said the human body's an antenna, you just need to, like a knob on a radio, you just need to tune in to absorbing the information that you may or may not be accessible to receive. It's the same thing for me. It's the same thing. Find out what you like, even if it's an hour a day, 30 minutes a day, where you say, okay, instead of going to sleep at this time, I'll push it back a little bit, or I'll wake up a little bit earlier to read a book or to do this or that. Because ultimately, when you spend, in my opinion, that doesn't mean to be, a loner per se, or, socially, away from everybody. But when you develop your own path, I think this also speaks to the ideological concept of a reality split, if you will. When you develop your own path of internal pursuit, which essentially means finding what you like to do, running with it, and then continuing that pursuit, you'd be damn surprised. Not you two, obviously, but in general, one would be damn surprised what they can pull out of themselves, if that makes sense. So that would be my I guess avenue of doing it.
Yeah, and so that's what Bashar, the channeler Bashar says, live life to your highest excitement. And then when you finish that event, then figure out what is going to make you most excited the next 30 minutes. And then that, you just live that to your highest excitement at all times. and you can't go wrong. So you're on that. So you do get a lot of creative material. And how do you process? Do you write it down? Are you doing books, or let's go through
I
what?
do sure. So what I do essentially is I do everything that I think of in certain regards. I first and foremost, my process is quite it's very interesting, Grant. I appreciate the question, because sometimes what will happen is I'll receive you could say a download, if you will, and I'll know I call it a download. And again, to the audience, make of this as you will. I don't there's a difference between making correlations in my head from a download and receiving a download. So when I receive one, it's a shiver, it's a shock down my, like an electrical pulse, if you will. What then ends up happening after that is I'll immediately jump to writing down what I received. Sometimes it's words, sometimes it's images. A lot of times, believe it or not, it's geometrical, as we call it here, at least. And I will jump immediately to looking up academic papers. That's usually what I jump to, because for me, it's not so much that I want to just the reason I like academic papers is not because it comes from academia, but because of the structure. I then ask myself, okay, could this be scaled up, speaking to fractals, cymatics, the macro versus the micro, as above, so below, that whole concept. For example, could this, what I'm reading in an academic paper, I'll give you one example. I was reading one by Charles M. Lieber having to do with bio-nanomaterials. And one thing I found quite peculiar was that there's an organic cell within the human body, all organic cells rather, are more receptive to receiving an electrical impulse, even an electromagnetic impulse, into the capillaries of that organic cell, if the nanotech is more comfortable these are the words used in the paper, more comfortable in appearance to the organic cell. And I then scale that up to liken that of, for example, Mr. Luelizondo's example of pandas in a zoo. We laugh when we see the zookeepers put the panda suit on, but the pandas take it seriously. Now, what if we apply that to that of Mr. Jacques Vallée's information structures, and we look at that from an optical sense having to do with phase conjugation, which is when you take two pairs of laser beams and point them at each other, and you get an angstrom level measurement, the dual slit experiment result type phenomena, if you will. And so that's where my mind goes in that regard. That's usually, it starts with an academic paper, not so much because it's from academia, but because of the way in which it's structured for me to interpret relative to you could say, the download I received. That's usually where I go, generally.
Do you believe that someone has it figured out? Say, whether it be cabal or government, or do you think someone has a lot of this all figured out already?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. This is, in my humble opinion, I could be wrong. This is what we're living in, if you will, is too well organized to not have been figured out. Now, if you're asking if someone within this, we could say, I don't mean to allude to a negative connotation here, but scientifically, I think it's been figured out. As to whether it's been figured out within one compartment is another question. As to whether or not it's been stovepiped or compartmentalized within areas of the military-industrial complex and private industry is another question. But I think so, yeah. And I think, I mean, if I'm being honest with you, Grant, I think we're being given the illusion. I think of a set of what we call free will is at play, in mixed with an illusion. Something is getting in between what we view optically as space-time, I guess. It has to do, I mean, this has to, forgive me for the ramble, but this has to do with Minkowski space-time. So like when you look, for example, from a distance far away at someone or something, they're a dot and they're very small. And as you walk up and approach them even more, they become more interactable with depth. And that speaks to the Cartesian plane. And I think what we're seeing there is, whether they're human, non-human, or all the above, ultra-terrestrial, all of that, I think they're utilizing that in a much more enhanced fashion, essentially.
I see Nicole's here for a question, but I want to add one last quick question. Do you think Lou Elizondo knows what's going on?
I think he has a pretty good idea.
Okay. Nicole?
I was just going to kind of piggyback on the rundown that you gave in sort of your process. And I think where Grant was leading with his book on inspiration is, I think Grant and I, being older than you, we kind of eliminate or maybe don't recognize a creative outlet as a YouTube channel or a group
Yeah.
coming together to discuss this. So I just kind of wanted to fill out your answer with, you mentioned synchronicities and a group like your Patreon group around you, and you bounce these ideas off of each other. Is this where synchronicities come into play for you?
Truth be told, slightly, but me actually, for me personally, and I liken this just to myself because everybody's different. For me personally, it's more so when I'm alone, going on walks, a little bit of exercising, a little bit of reading, actually watching documentaries, believe it or not, particularly ones on psychology, because I find that to be understanding the psychology of someone. There's a difference between justification and rationalization, as our good friend Nicole has said. I have to give him the credit, but teaching me that in that regard. But then extrapolating from that in a metaphysical perspective to that of, again, metaphysics then leads to the Platonic solids, which leads to geometry, and then we go full circle, the whole thing again. So
Beautiful. Back to you.
Spiritual. Is there a spiritual component to this? And if so, what is it?
in my opinion, absolutely. I think whether it's the chi, the prana, the ether, you name it. I think, again, as Einstein said, I'm paraphrasing, forgive me if I'm butchering, science cannot do without religion, and religion is lame without science, something along those lines. And the reason I say that is because it seems as though that we look, for example, at what folklore is called, magic and all of this, and then we start to think, okay, well, from a spiritual perspective, to what extent can we liken that to some type of potentially electromagnetic phenomena of sorts? Where's the merging point for me? Essentially, that's what I ask myself constantly. Where's the merging point between the nuts and bolts and between the metaphysical and, you could say, non-physical, non-tangible aspects? So for me, it's very simple. What I say to people, well, simple, took me months to figure out for myself, but and I still haven't figured all of it out. But when people say, well, okay, I subscribe to the idea of there being some type of nuts and bolts technology that develops some type of phenomena relative to our optical perception, but I don't believe in ghosts. I say, okay, to each their own, right? I think personally the two go hand in hand, but I think if we look at it like this, which is that if we think of laser beams, right? We think of how those are, light waves and the vibrational states of particle fluctuations that are not as tightly condensed in a vibrational matter as, say, for example, my phone, more of a solid, right? I then say to the person, not to convince them, but just to open their mind to an alternative perspective, because I could be wrong too. But it's one thing to say, okay, there's carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide in the garage of your house when the car is turned on in the garage. People believe that, no problem, but you can't touch it, you can't interact with it, but they believe it like it's nothing. So let's take that and liken that to things like ball lightning, things like plasma. Now, forgive me for seeming potentially conspiratorial here, but I find it quite peculiar that within the academic literature, it seems as though the stuff that the topics of interest that would lead to a paradigm shifting revelation in any field in STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, are the things that are not publicly discussed in the academic literature. For example, plasma and ball lightning, for one. Now, okay, we've seen in the last 2 to 4 years, if I'm not mistaken, sort of a revitalization in addressing that topic in the public domain, yes, but it's new and it shouldn't be, in my opinion. Plasma should have been something from 1904, 1905 that should have been starting to not be explained, because I don't think you ever finish explaining something, but at least begin to pursue. So I liken that to and we look, for example, at Mr. Salvatore Paez, the UFO Navy patent gentleman, saying on Kurt Mungel's show, he says, Kurt, you cannot achieve these types of densities and successions in this technology with solids, but you can with plasmas. So I wonder, that's where I go with, and that's where I am currently attempting to make that intermergence between the physical and the non-physical, the quote unquote spooky action at a distance type situation. That's where I personally and currently reside in a mental space.
How much do you think classification has to do with, because what happened in 1939 when they discovered the nuclear chain the atomic chain reaction, that immediately everything disappeared off the discussion of anything nuclear. So do you think that there is a problem in terms of stuff being classified? For example, if you suddenly were to get a lot of the secrets, that maybe the Canadian government would come and sort of tell you that your stuff is now classified and you can't talk about it? Do you think that's part of the problem?
I think that is largely the issue pertaining to a handful of, we could say, both rogue and formal factions that have, in fact, we look at the Atomic Energy Commission and we look at their founding between, I believe, the mid 40s, if I'm not mistaken, give or take, and we look at the founding of the Department of Energy in 1977. What the hell went on for the 30 years in between? All we off the books, in my opinion, you saw a lot of those guys from AEC get buddy with private industry aerospace guys. I think there was a deliberate compartmentalization and scuttling off pertaining to several branches, pertaining specifically of the Air Force to that of the DOE. And that's where, the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Yeah, I would say there's Winston Churchill, in his words, referred to, I'm not claiming the Atomic Energy Commission, but referred to a loose conglomerate of, we could say, transnational elites that have, vying interests in not having their rice bowl upset, if that makes sense, as Mr. Churchill, in his words, called them the high cabal. So I don't think it goes, it's far-fetched to say that there's some type of at least vaguely rogue and loosely affiliated apparatus between academia, military, you name it, in an attempt to cover this stuff up and do exactly what you said, Grant, sort of, give an elbow to some people and say, no, you're not pressing on this topic today.
Exactly. Now, let me ask you the question, because we talked to Dr. Eric Walker, who was the former chairman of the Institute for Defense Analysis, had 14 honorary doctorate degrees, for 15 years as president of Penn State University. And when we talked to him, he said to us, let me get your reaction. He said, why should we change the rules to satisfy your curiosity?
Oh, that pisses me off. Grant, I will write you a paper for you to send to him on why
He's dead now. But write the paper anyway. Write the paper anyway.
Yeah.
On why that needs to be changed. First and foremost, I mean, the fact that, okay, we're living in.
Let me frame this a little better for you, maybe. We're pushing or possibly in the middle of disclosure. So does this tie into a post-disclosure world view for you, and what's that look like? Does that help a little?
This ties in. I think it does. I think what we're seeing, and I think we can liken this to even outside of the UAP topic. What I mean by that specifically is the fact that it's the same way of saying, well, okay, we want to sort of change the banking system, and people, I mean, that's a whole other thing too. But to me, when I look at this, I look at it like this: we are giving intent and focus, whether it's, you can call it imagination, the isness, the three body problem, you name it, prayer. We are giving intent to something that in a materialistic sense is real only in tangible interactivity, which is money, currency. We're giving imagination and intent to give value to that, while anything outside of that view that we give intent to, we're told, no, it's a figment of your imagination, dismiss it. How ironic. The same stuff that they're telling us to use towards their product, we can't apply to our own. And when I say our own product, I refer to our own experiences, sovereign ones. And that's why, amongst many other things, people have been ridiculed, lost pensions, lost jobs, in some cases have been murdered for this. And that's got to stop. That's not, I understand the extent to which one needs to keep certain secrets relative to the safety of their respective people. But at the same time, there comes a point where I think I'm currently exploring the possibility that many apparatuses and elements of global governments, world governments, it's not so much that they have an issue admitting to us that there are non-humans. It's that I think they have an issue admitting that they sold us out to them in certain regards. I don't mean to fearmonger, but I think there are certain aspects of that are unfortunately quite negative, and have probably led to people like Mr. Elizondo and others saying enough is enough in this regard.
Okay, so you said sold us out to them. Who's them?
Not so benevolently oriented faction of non-humans, or maybe humans. It's not, I don't, that have a vying interest in ensuring that our bioresonant emissivity from our bodies does not increase, or our frequency, if you will.
Okay, the question they would the skeptic would ask, and why would they not have done this in 1940 and just take us off the map if they had these evil intentions? Why are they waiting to unveil whatever they were going to unveil?
I think ultimately, why are they waiting? I think world governments are not particularly are calling the shots, to be honest with you. I think the overall phenomenon itself, whatever it may be, is in fact the one that is quote unquote calling the shots. And I'll explain from a scientific perspective why I say this. Very quickly. So we've seen in ancient cultures time and time again, the zodiac wheel has been something that has been alluded to as a form of guidance for planting crops, food, you name it, when to stay warm, all that kind of stuff. And people say these days, well, don't you know everyone's waking up, Dave, because we're in the age of Aquarius. And just like the both of you, probably, to me, it's kind of like when people throw the word consciousness and quantum around. What does that mean? Well, the age of Aquarius, for me personally, from a frequential sense, if we were to visualize our solar system as a closed loop circuit moving like a clock, I think what we're seeing in what we call or label in the verbiage as the age of Aquarius as a lightening of the densification of the frequencies that are being emitted via the sun's rays in a magnetic sense on Earth, because James C. Maxwell's quaternions and his interpretation of a unified field theory showed that magnetic frequencies, or magnetic waves rather, hug light rays, hence the term electromagnetic. So point being, in layman's terms, say you live in New York, you live in an apartment, it's wintertime, the window's open a little bit and you're sleeping in bed. Are you going to feel the cold coming in from the window in your apartment? If you have more, are you going to feel it more avidly and strongly if you have one blanket on or 5 blankets on? Obviously, you're going to feel more of the cold if you just have one blanket on. I liken the blankets to frequencies in that regard. And I think those frequencies, amongst many other, you could say, moving parts, metaphorically, has put our world leaders in a position where they're like, shit, we can't hide all of this. That's my personal take. I could be wrong.
Okay, so in the United States, they have started to unravel this stuff. I've always pointed out that it is in front of the Armed Services Committee and in front of the Intelligence Committee, and basically that's except for NASA just recently. But basically, that's weapons. That's the whole idea that Walker was sort of alluding to was, like they invent GPS, and then once they're get onto level 2 of GPS, then they give the GPS to the people, and this sort of spin off that all this technology it was developed during World War II, whether it be jet engines, plastic explosives, nylon, synthetic rubber, all this stuff was invented during World War II, and then it was spun off into the general public, which would appear to me that's how they operate the system, that first the military gets it. So you mentioned things that necessarily shouldn't be released. Where do you draw the line in terms of what they get to keep as national security, that we're going to get the Russians with it or the Chinese with it, or not let the Chinese or the Russians have it? What is that cutoff line between what they're allowed to keep secret and what we get in disclosure?
I appreciate the question, Grant. I think the cutoff line, well, as a matter of fact, in this particular circumstance, within the context of that question and what's going on currently right now, I think that particularly within North America, even in Europe, but North America, I think that I right now myself am pondering that question on the daily. I think a way to we could say reinforce a much more stronger advocacy of where and how that line should be drawn is if the masses around the world are exposed to an undeniable set of not just evidence but proof, whether it's interacting with non-humans in person or otherwise, to then say, okay, maybe it's time for world governments to coalesce in a manner that they never have before, similar to Mr. Reagan's UN speech, saying, I can't help but think of how much we'd come together if we realized we were not the only ones here. Now, with that said, that's my, kumbaya, we all sit by the fire, everyone's happy story. In the particular context of today and right now, I think the line should be, it's tough, Grant. It's tough. You got me on this one, man. You got me on this one because there's part of me that, again, I'm a glass half full person, but I also understand that, if there's enough of an issue with terrorists grabbing nukes these days or nuclear material to compile a nuclear bomb, if you have a terrorist gaining access to the alleged 0 point energy, where force fields, as a matter of fact, don't weaken when you penetrate it, but due to kinetic energy get stronger, what's to stop a terrorist from putting a force field bubble like in Star Wars around him, walking into a bank without a mask? So I hear you. So to answer your question, I don't know right now. I hope so. I hope I'll find out soon or figure it out. But
you had Lou Elizondo. Maybe if you have him on again, you can ask him, because he always goes to his security clearance. I have a security clearance, so he knows there's a dividing line between what is national security and what is disclosure stuff. Nicole?
I was just going to chime in and say I don't think anybody can give a good answer to that question. I think when you go too far with it, we all get terrified at some point. But then I think that might be the answer in and of itself, that it's like we have to come together and get over it together, whatever it may be. So.
My position is always that it should not be in the hands of the weapons people. It should be in the hands of the scientific people. That if we're, like, as I always said, like, you take a look at this compared to nuclear energy is going to make nuclear energy look like matchsticks. And that the fact that if we're going to turn this into weapons, I'm not on board, but if we're going to try to save the world, but it seems now with the armed services and the intelligence committee running this thing and demanding all the answers. And what you see is, I always say to people, like, what have you actually gotten from the disclosure in the United States? Absolutely nothing. All you know is that these guys got briefed, and it's all national security, and they're not going to release anything. They released 1 out of 144 sightings, so nothing's really changed. It's almost like the black world has come to the white world, and now we're all going to work, and it's all going to get sunk into the black hole, and we're never going to see it. And what's coming the other way? It's like there's really nothing coming when you really come down to what are they telling us about what's going on, except for a bunch of rumors that we can't confirm.
Well, to your point, Grant, here's the thing. This is why, to your point, very strongly, I think that particularly after World War II in specific, after if my history is correct, after Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and all of that, I think I watched recent. It's interesting you bring this up, because I watched the speech that Einstein and some other scientists gave, which was a very formalized speech in which they stated that they felt a very deep moral and ethical responsibility. But if I'm not mistaken, there was a leak or a delivery to the Soviets pertaining to the scientific knowledge needed to develop this. And I believe the leak came from the scientific group working on this. I'm paraphrasing because I don't know the specifics, unfortunately, but I think, to your point, the scientific community at the time were smarter than the politicians. They understood the need for balance, that, okay, we've built this weapon now, and unfortunately, now that we've built it, we must provide it to you could say, the adversary, the other world power, to ensure mutually assured destruction, which by definition, hopefully doesn't even occur because of that mutual assurance. So to your point, I think it should be in the hands of the scientific community. I think there's one last thing, if I may say, there have been years of compartmentalization that have allowed for pure stagnation in scientific development because of the compartmentalization. I think if 3 scientists in a room being able to discuss everything and anything, any data they receive, can make more progress in a week than highly classified, even overly classified military programs do in 5 years.
Now, I got a photo. You mentioned Nagasaki. I got a photo from a Japanese journalist that she obtained from a guy who is a Marine, and his files have been put at the Marine Archives in Washington, D.C. And they were looking through the photos that he'd gone to Nagasaki a couple of days after the detonation of the bomb. He was taking photographs, and never realized until 1999, I believe it was, when they went through the photographs. And here's as clear as day a UFO over Nagasaki a couple of days after the detonation of the hydrogen bomb. So let me ask you, one of the members, we're going to have a panel of Canadian parliamentary people, and that's probably the first time we've made this public, in Canada. And one of the things that we want to talk about is nuclear weapons. So you know that UFOs are very interested in nuclear weapons, in the silos, in nuclear power plants. What do you think is going on there?
I think it has to do with, amongst many other things, it has to do with ionization of air pockets. And I think it also has to do with something that we've covered, particularly on our member side of the show, patreon.com/Generation Z, having to do with the Kármán line. which actually my friend, partner, research partner Riel has done a fantastic job of diving into. The Kármán line was established shortly after the we could say the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs were dropped, and interestingly enough, it was allegedly around the same time of some certain alleged meetings President Eisenhower had with certain non-human entities, and you name it, at Edwards Air Force Base and all of this. I think the nuclear interest as a whole, though, has to do with believe it or not, we could say temporal affairs having to do with what we call, I say this carefully, time travel, I think, or time manipulation, in addition to manipulation of the what's called the Levi-Cavita space-time metric in physics. I think that I don't mean to be overly vague here, but I think it has a lot to do with what we call radiation, X-rays, gamma rays. I think it has to do with what certain people called virtual state symmetry. Linda Moulton Howe, who I've recently interviewed, called her source said self-organizing software. I think it has to do with something that is outside of our 5 observables, that is in fact not artificial, but more so natural or organic relative to the evolution of the planet, that is now coming into, or always has been coming into, the time domain of our observable vector state, if you will. And I think that the nuclear situation is obviously it goes back to the whole, you dress up as a panda to make sure that the monkeys don't, or as the pandas don't leave the cage or whatever. I think it's to keep an eye on us, but at the same time, I think it's much grander than that. I think it also, believe it or not, has something to do with what we call karma. That's a whole other deep dive from a both esoteric, metaphysical, and scientific angle. But I think there's a multitude of things. I think it's temporal. I think they're basically concerned that, are they going to just shoot themselves in the foot? I also think that, again, even if there are certain non-human factions, if you will, that do not like us per se, it's kind of like, again, not to stick to the negative here, but it's kind of, I'll be very blunt with this example. How you gonna eat the food if your restaurant's blown up? So if that makes sense, whether that's energetic.
Yeah. Nicole? Yeah. Nicole, you're back on. I see you got a question. Oh, you're muted. You're laughing and muted.
Yeah, I was just laughing. No, that was a great analogy. So.
I'm not trying to liken all alleged non-human entities to, harvesting our what Mr. Bob Monroe back in the day called loosh or this or that. But I think there's as above, so below. There's negative, there's got to be positive, vice versa. So.
You got a question, Nicole?
No, I think that's kind of a good maybe stopping point. We've covered.
Oh no, I got a couple more questions.
Oh,
let me go for the queue. I got one. You talked about downloads, and I've had 2 major downloads, and my main one was February 26, 2012, when I got with absolute certainty the message. It's got to do with consciousness. So spell out consciousness as you see it. How does it apply to the UFO phenomena in your regard?
Oh, well, okay. That's an interesting question. I appreciate that, because consciousness is such a, again, to the point of everyone that gets pissed off. And I sympathize with people that go, these words, quantum, consciousness, they're thrown around constantly. What do they mean? I think consciousness means one thing to a philosopher. I think it means something else to a computer scientist. I think it means something else to a neurologist. I think, on and on, particle physicist, you name it. To me, I think it speaks to, particularly, I am of the ideological subscription at the moment, although I could be wrong and my opinions change, of Mr. Roger Penrose. The fact that it is something within us that inhabits a non-local component, if you will. It is, which speaks to James C. Maxwell's bidirectional quaternions, which is that there is everything happening everywhere simultaneously, which speaks to, in physics, something called scalar waves. Scalar waves has to do with magnitude. It's everywhere at once. Whereas there's something else in physics called, called vector scalar states, which is that you then take a vector like a pyramid to then enclose that energy all around you. You can call it the ether, the prana, the 0 point energy, to enclose it and confine it in a way to manipulate it. And again, just like any other tool, it is not bad nor good. It is up to the holder of that tool what one does with it. I think consciousness resides within some form of understanding self. And I don't mean to, I think the closest one has gotten to with respects to understanding it in an archetypal blueprint type sense are in three different areas. Carl Jung's archetypes, I think, as well as Jacques Vallée's concept of, messengers of deception, in addition to the Gnostics, the Demiurge, the Archons, that whole concept there. I know that's quite a large body of work there over the many millennia, but I also think in a more contextual sense relative to today, I think that Mr. Michael Levin, who's worked on xenobots and all of that, he seems to be alluding to some type of electrical underlying blueprint that is inherent within whatever we're in, which to me speaks to the concept of, again, simulation theory pertaining to information structures that seem to be controlled from outside of whatever we're in. And I don't mean to allude to some type of trap. It could be, could not be. But what I'm essentially saying here is that I think consciousness is in fact non-local, non-computational, as Mr. Penrose says. And I think as well, it's, I don't know what it is. I only can say what it isn't so far. Okay. So to give a long story short, that's where I go. Okay. So I apologize, Grant, that I can't. Yeah.
No problem. Talk about Generation Z, talk about your Patreon group, talk about what you're doing, talk about some of the people you've interviewed and where you're going with it.
Sure. So I've interviewed everyone from, actually, I would like to interview the both of you on my end, if that would be all right sometime soon. In addition to people like Oliver Stone's son, Sean Stone, of course, Mr. Ross Coulthard, Linda Moulton Howe, many other, of course, Mr. Elizondo, Mr. Cahill. We have many people up and coming on the show as well. Other people we have series with quite frequently, Mr. Dan Winter, many scientists, academics, philosophers, all of this. But what we do essentially is we mechanical engineers, astrophysicists, but even we try and ensure that from all the way from the layman's understanding of just diving into the subject on day one, all the way to someone that knows what they want to pursue in a more specific sense of the field, we do our best to cover all of that. We do anywhere from, truthfully, 2 to 7 members only episodes per week, doing our best to cover everything. And that is separate from the 2 to 3 times per week Zoom calls we have, basically just think tank type situations. We just, no topic is set. We just hop on, talk for anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. It's a great thing. And we have early access, all of this. And I do want to say as well, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to promote my Patreon, because patreon.com/Generation Z is basically how I'm fortunate enough to just to get by, pay my bills, and do this full time, actually. So it's I really appreciate that, because this is no disrespect to anybody else, but I don't run ads on my channel, particularly because of censorship reasons, but also at the end of the day, I don't really like putting stuff out there that I wouldn't want to see myself. I understand people have to pay their bills, but I hate, before I go to sleep at night, I put on a YouTube video and I got to wait for that ad to go through. So that's basically what we do there. And there's much more we cover on the Patreon as well. We do real in-person presentations, everything from deep into the occult, from the Kabbalah, all of this, the Demiurge, the tablets of Thoth, all of that, to, again, the hard raw data of it. We explore all of it. So even the spiritual side, you name it.
Wow.
And with respects to direction, I plan, but I also don't. It's interesting. I live in the moment, but plan for what the larger objectives are. But I kind of go with literally just like the water example that we started with in this conversation. If there's something that I have planned, but I wake up that day and I intuitively, I feel it's not appropriate or conducive to what's going to be done, I'll scrap it, change it, make adjustments. And for me, it's very simple as well. A lot of people have also said to me, on the Patreon, why the Patreon and all of this. And well, for me personally, it's very simple. People can vote with their wallets if they think what I'm doing is good or not. If they like it, they can stay subscribed. If they don't like it, just as much respect to them as well. So,
well, I'm glad to see you're doing it full time. That's quite a dedication, especially at your age, where a lot of people are looking to a big fancy car and look for a high-paying job that you've dedicated. So
no, if I may say, my perspective to that, sir, is that the reason I have zero interest in that kind of stuff is because, to me at least, if one can understand the science, the philosophy, and the underlying blueprint of it all, you can then I apply this as well to when people say, Dave, how come, we cover it a lot, but how come personally, Dave, you're not interested in what, certain beings, their skin is made up of, or what craft are made up of? Well, if we can understand, or at least attempt to understand, the underlying archetype of this reality, everything else is simple. Because then it would be, okay, if it's metal, then it's this. If it's, you see what I'm saying? So I apply that to the show and to the overall objective as well. I have, yeah.
Yeah. One last question. Do you deal with experiencers on your session? Do you talk to people who, claim to have been on the craft and interacted? And as I've got the one book coming out with the people who claim they've flown the craft and stuff like that, where, you get that kind of really bizarre leading edge stuff.
I've to be honest with you, Grant, I've had a couple, obviously not to the to the prestige of yourself, sir, but it's something I should do more often. I recently had Mr. Ryan Bledsoe on, Chris Bledsoe.
So yes, what did he tell you? He's a big name now.
Yeah, yeah.
Did he give any scoops?
And he's I mean, well,
sometimes he drops some stuff he shouldn't be talking about.
Yeah, I don't know specifically if he was gracious enough to give any scoops there, but the conversation itself was about 45 minutes to an hour, and he very respectful, very nice. There are a couple things that I personally disagree with him on, but I also find it enlightening. I will say that the fact that we can disagree in a non-emotional manner and still, again, understand that the disagreements by definition are the form of exploration and creativity because of the disagreements. Because if we all agreed, what's there to explore? So I think that's.
Can you talk about what you differed on with him? And
Sure. He doesn't think that there's a secret space program of sorts. I personally think there is, but that's just me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, simple as that.
Well, Dave, I want to say keep doing what you're doing, because your voice and your message is getting out there. And
thank you.
You've been doing it such a short time, but I think your subscribers and the group around you really speaks for itself. So
I appreciate that so much. Thank you so much, Nicole.
We'll be in touch, and yeah, maybe message me and Grant before you talk with Ryan again. We'll give you
sounds good.
We'll try to drag you. Yeah, we'll try to drag you into our Canadian initiative. It was going along great. Now it's sort of stalled, but you have an idea what we're doing, and we'd like to have you be a part of it. So we'll keep in touch there.
Thank you so much, sir. I appreciate it. And Nicole as well. To the both of you, from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
It was an honor.
Take care. It was an honor. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, he jumped out. All right. I cut mine. And then I was going to BS a little bit.
He's off to do some work.
Kind of crazy. Like, I'm real impressed with that kid. So
yeah, he's quite into it. That's for sure. I mean, he's got everything going, and I was interested to see what he disagreed with Ryan about, but
it's always a secret space program, and these guys, like, they just can't come together on it. Like,
yeah. Well, I don't know if Ryan would be wrong about that. His father's got, as Chris is telling me, he's got all these very high level people around him that are, and Lou Elizondo's in the space program now. He's in the what do they call it, Space Force or whatever.
Well, that's kind of what I mean about this kid. People are flocking to him. Like, I don't know if it's his behind the scenes, connections, or just his topics or the way he's handling it.
I think it's topics, because a lot of that stuff he's doing, a lot of the secret space program and the all this kind of stuff, the Linda Moulton Howe stuff that Linda's got their 200,000 subscribers. People like that sort of conspiracy leading edge stuff. But he is a very smart kid. I mean, it's incredible what he's done.
There's something there. Like I said, if he's where he's at the age he is, it's like boom for Will's generation. Like, that makes me so happy. Like, watch his little demo that he sent me, that I sent you now. It's really quick, and he probably covered, well, he did dive deep. He does know more about what's going on with
I should have gotten, he said he's in contact with some Canadian parliamentary people. I would like to know about that.
He hasn't spilled who to me. He's threw that out there to me a couple times, and he did drop his research partner's name, Riel.
Yeah.
And they've been to your Toronto group, and that's how they met Mark. So I was waiting for him to spill the beans on that, but he might be holding that card.
Well, I didn't ask him. I think he'd probably answer it, because it would be interesting if we could add those guys to the list, or to a future one, because I mean, they're going to invite 10. I'm wondering if it's the same people.
Right.
Because I had a guy on the street say to me, "Oh, you're doing this parliamentary thing. I know there's one guy I know who's doing it." And then he sent me an interview that McGuire had done with Conspiracy Show in Toronto. And so then I didn't even know he'd done that interview, but he did an interview with he's one of the big broadcasters. That's why I didn't want to go to Victor, because Victor would have suggested this guy, and there's no way I want a guy that runs the Conspiracy Show out of Toronto to be doing.
Right.
That's
Well,
what they don't want.
I think knowing that Lou and Cahill kind of tossed this guy into the hosting ring, does have some weight in it. I think he is a little more in our community than Kurt is, but you can't get more Canadian. I mean, it's not like we have a barrel full of Canadian youngsters to.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And so, but we'll go. We'll see how it works out, and I'll have to watch some more of his stuff. I saw his interview with Lou, but then I left as soon as Lou packed it in and left the interview.
Yeah.
I didn't watch the Cahill part, but
I don't really see McGuire letting Jamungle be like the linchpin to all this. If he's really a problem, then who cares? Sorry, Kurt, that sort of thing. But I don't know if that's a reason for a holdup, or if it's just that these cats are fat cats and they move slow. What I mean?
But it's not very good for us relying on them if we're going to put 7 parliamentary guys and then he doesn't show up.
Well, that's what I meant. Maybe I should drop these dates and those details to Lou, because it was Cahill that told me to bypass him. He's like, just cut me out. I don't know if I'm being a middleman holdup, or if Lou just ignores me.
Those are dates that that McGuire wants confirmed, so he can send out the invites. I mean, maybe Lou doesn't know that there's going to be 10 invites to parliamentary guys in Canada. That's more than they got going in the United States. So the fact that they're waiting for a date to send out the invites to the members of Parliament.
Well, I shot it out to Cahill this morning that I hadn't got a response back from Lou, and he said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said that was the last I heard from him, and that was like 6 hours ago.
Yeah.
So maybe he's poking his bear, and I'll give it till tonight, I guess, and then I'll kind of draft a more detailed email, and I'll just tell him, I'll be like, "Hey, we got 10 on the hook here, and Larry McGuire's chomping at the bit about these dates."
That he wants to do the invite. He wants to invite these guys, and they've all been briefed. Right. And
like, if he can at least confirm a date out of those 4, and stick in a meeting wherever he wants, then that's really what we need to move forward. So
okay.
If he was going to voice an opinion about Jamungle or whatever was going on with the plans moving forward, then let's talk, so they can be laid out now, though. That's where I was.
Yeah, if that's a sticking point, then we should solve it. Because I mentioned the whole thing. I didn't know much of the detail, but I just said to Drew, there's a problem here, and that may be what the holdup is that they don't think highly of Jamungle. And he said, "Well, I didn't know that." So now he knows, and if that's the case, well, then we should discuss it, and we'll make a switch. But you can't do a guy in who's briefed all these people and is willing to put all these people's careers on the line, and then he's saying he wants disclosure, and then he doesn't play on this. This is one of the biggest stories of all times. I mean, that all these guys are going to come public.
That's why I recorded him saying, "Whatever you want, Grant, we'll be there." Because I'll be like, "Remember this clip, Lou?"
Yeah. Okay, let me know how it's going, and maybe we'll have to get McGuire or Drew to make a contact to him to get his attention.
Yeah, that might be it too, because I did notice that the email Cahill told me to email was not the one that you had. So the one I just sent you, I mean, I don't know if you used it before or sent it on to McGuire, but the one Cahill sent me, I guess, is the
live one. Yeah, this is okay. Let me know.
I will.
Thank you for setting this up for me.
Hey, you're welcome.
And
Anytime.
I'll set up the priest. I'll set up the Dominican priest talking to the dead people.
Think about an update with Jimmy Blanchett too.
Yeah.
He's on about a 2-week rotation of bugging me to update you.
Okay. Okay, will
Okay.
do.
Bye.
Talk to you later.